Since the dawn of time, there has been 4 areas of the pitch a footballer can operate in: goalkeeper, defence, midfield and attack. But throughout football history, different players have come in and evolved the roles that you have throughout those positions. So let's start at the back with the big man himself, Manuel Neuer. There's been keepers very similar to Manuel Neuer. The second best German keeper of all time in Oliver Kahn. Peter Schmeichel was very similar. Big, dominant, huge personalities, and they would never stay on their goal line. But Neuer was just a different breed, wasn't it? The keeper position was, and always was before Neuer, a stopper. Your main role was to stop goals from going in. And yes, it still should be the role of a stopper. If you don't save the ball, you're going to lose the game. However, everything we're seeing from keepers nowadays, it was just icing on the cake for keepers in the past. And in my opinion, the catalyst for that was Manuel Neuer. Only a rare bunch of elite centre-backs used to be able to play out. They used to be able to take the ball on the half turn. But now, most top-level centre-backs have ball skills comparable to top midfielders of the past. The days of Pepe Reina ignoring Jamie Carragher's shout for the ball and launching it as far over Stanley Park as you can possibly see are over. The keeper is now an extension of the outfield. Manuel Neuer was sometimes further up the pitch than his own centre-backs. Funnily enough, his change mostly started under Pep, and it's weird because it feels like every change in modern football is due to Pep Guardiola. Neuer was the sweeper keeper. There has been sweeper keepers before him, like I say, like an Oliver Kahn. However, Manuel Neuer completely changed it, because if a player on the opposite team was playing off the shoulder on the halfway line, if they got a through ball, Manuel Neuer was already past his 18-yard box. So there's a good chance, because he was so athletic as well, that he'd be able to close them down. And once he got the ball, he was able to play out like a midfielder. Ederson has kind of taken this over at Manchester City. I mean, he has ball skills that I've never seen a keeper have before. Better than Manuel Neuer. However, Neuer was the first one to do it. He was the first one to dribble through the defence, and if a player of course was just going to close him down and cut off the angles to Jerome Boateng, Philipp Lahm, then he'd continue to dribble it out near the halfway line. He wasn't only the best shot stopper of his generation, and maybe of all time, you could argue before Ederson and the future lads came in, he was the best distributor of the ball, and he made it a desirable trait for a keeper to essentially be an outfield player. Nowadays, if you don't have 2 feet as a keeper, if you can't hit an 80-yard diag to Mo Salah or Phil Foden, then you're not going to be in a top team either. We're seeing keepers get their distribution prioritised over their actual ability. Robert Sanchez for Chelsea, he's been under massive criticism, but it's because he was so good with the ball that a lot of these teams were able to overlook his lack of shot stopping ability. But let's move on to defenders, because there's been so many throughout time who've had a massive influence over the game. A player like Rio Ferdinand, he was a freak athlete, wasn't he? But he was great from playing it out from the back. However, you could argue there has been players in the past who have had similar abilities. I think Rio just took it maybe to that next level. One that I will argue is that there's never been a player like Trent Alexander-Arnold at right back. The guy could be the best passer of the ball in Europe. The man has 64 assists in the Premier League. Just for context, that is more than Juan Mata, Mesut Ozil, Paul Scholes, Eden Hazard. And let's also remember, it's not a generation where you have strikers like a Didier Drogba in the box who you could just whip a ball out of nowhere and he has a good chance of heading it. No, Liverpool haven't had a target man during his time. They've had a false 9. They've had 2 wingers who are essentially the strikers, and he's got that amount of assists. I'd say he's the closest thing to a David Beckham, but he's moved it to the defensive position. He's evolved the position to a point where defenders are no longer judged on the defensive ability, they're judged on the goal involvement. And that is why someone like Trent, who has been criticised massively for his defensive inabilities, people can still look past them because he's so good. Most of the all-time attacking fullbacks, they're more like wingers, aren't they? They're really quick, they're really athletic, like a Dani Alves, like a Maicon, like a Marcelo. They're so good on the ball that they're able to get in behind. Most of their assists mainly just come from hitting the ball across the box. Whereas Trent, he's not slow, but he's definitely not a sprinter. He's not a brilliant dribbler of the ball. He hasn't got loads of skills in his locker, but it's just his pure passing ability that completely changes defences, because you have to close him down when he's on the wing. He's also become a midfielder, which have forced other fullbacks to go into the midfield. He can play in the double pivot, he can play as a central 8, and I think one of the main things that it has done, especially under Klopp, it increased workloads for fullbacks, him and Andy Robertson especially, and the change of their position has even somewhat changed a winger's position where they have to be more into the box because it will become too congested on the wings, and they've essentially become the strikers of the modern era. Let's move on to a midfielder, and that is the small French fella at Chelsea. And no, it's not N'Golo Kante, it's his godfather, Claude Makelele. If you have a position named after you, have you evolved the position or have you just created a position? I've always felt defensive mids before Makelele were a mix between centre-backs and central midfielders, weren't they? They were normally strong, they were normally great at breaking up the play, putting in massive tackles, but also had attacking ability, had a great shot on them. Daniele De Rossi is one of the best defensive midfielders of the 2000s era, and he's that ideal defensive mid that will just go through any opposition at the minute's notice, but also he had one of the best shots in Europe. But Makelele had one job, and that was to tackle. And tackle and tackle and tackle. And then his second job was really to then tackle and then give the ball to Iron Robin, give the ball to Damien Duff, Joe Cole. When most teams were playing a 4-4-2, Jose Mourinho and Makelele kind of evolved that because they brought in the 4-3-3 where Makelele would sit in front of John Terry and Ricardo Carvalho, Lampard and Joe Cole or Thiago would be in front of them, and it completely changed the game. Makelele's role was not to join the attack, it was to sit in front of the defenders, pick up the ball and just pass it. He was so unselfish, and his only aim was to just give it to someone who was better at attacking than him. He would put a different fear into players, other than someone like a Roy Keane, who you know is just going to be at you, he's going to go through you, potentially break one of your bones, whereas Claude Makelele will take the ball off you, and then 5 minutes later, you realise you don't have it anymore. N'Golo Kante was clearly his regen, and in my opinion, he took it to a new level, but we'll always remember Makelele as the first, as we'll always call it the Makelele role. Next, we have a player who was so influential, a company named a whole brand of yogurts after him, Thomas Muller. Thomas Muller. What position is Thomas Muller? They call him the Rondeuter for a reason. I googled that pronunciation. The translation is a space invader or the invader of space. Literally, if you type Rondeuter into Google, it will just come up as Thomas Muller. He's an odd player, isn't he? Because he's not really that quick, he's not that strong, he's not that great at passing or dribbling. He's a good finisher, but he's not an elite finisher. A man who wrote a book titled Pep Guardiola, which, funnily enough, is about Pep Guardiola. Marty Perarnau spoke about Muller saying, "Muller has lost more balls than any other Bayern player over the past 2.5 years. He doesn't dribble particularly well, and he's never been the fastest guy. His headers are unexceptional, and he could do some work on his shooting. He loves to press, but often does so with his head turned towards his own teammates, and yet this is a prodigiously talented football player." He just broke all rules regarding football, because there has been players who have been given the license to just free roam around the pitch. Of course there is. Essentially that is a number 10. A number 10 is just a playmaker who just marauds around that area. However, Thomas Muller is a bit different because sometimes he'd be a shadow striker for Lewandowski, sometimes he'd be a right midfielder, he'd be a central midfielder. I mean, he's probably played defensive midfielder at times. I mean, he must have been a coach's dream because anywhere on the pitch, I'm sure he'd play it. He evolved a position which, in my opinion, hasn't been replicated since. He created it and he killed it as well because no one has been able to do it. Let's just take a look at the heat map from the 15-16 season, which I believe is the best year of his career. I mean, what is he? What was he? A right midfielder? Defensive mid? A left back? Who knows? But regardless, he was one of a kind and it has not been replicated since. Let's finish on a not very well known player called Cristiano Ronaldo. And before the Messi mob come for me, Diego Maradona, that's all I'm going to say. But Ronaldo was just a different beast, wasn't he? He started as a tricky winger in his early days at Sporting and Man United, and he was one out of hundreds, wasn't he? Players who do far too many stepovers, lose the ball, and get a goal and assist every now and again. But during the late 2000s, there was a change, wasn't there? And he became a player that we've never seen before. He was 6 foot plus, could jump higher than the average NBA player, could run faster than a lot of professional sprinters, yet he was technically as good as nearly every other player on the planet. He truly is the Michael Jordan of football. He was the most technically sound player, yet he had the biggest work ethic and also was the most athletic player. During the past and also during Ronaldo's time, there were players who, were wingers and also athletes. John Barnes in the late 80s was one of the best players in the world. And go look back at John Barnes, he was athletic as anyone. Ronaldinho was also extremely athletic and extremely strong, but nowhere near the level of Ronaldo. And Ronaldo paired the winger position with strikers' goal records. Luis Figo, the man who Cristiano Ronaldo probably idolised as a young man from Portugal, 10 goals in his best season. John Barnes, 22 goals in his best season. Ronaldinho, 21. In Ronaldo's best season season at Real Madrid, just in the league, he scored 48 goals. Most strikers weren't scoring that amount of goals, yet he was doing it from the left wing. I think he was the turning point for what we see today, where wingers are essentially strikers. He started as a traditional winger, but then during his time at Man United and then Real Madrid, he moved that to cutting in every time, but having one of the best shots in the world, jumping over all of the defenders at the back post and scoring headers. But again, he didn't only evolve the skill set for the winger position, but it was also the expectations as well. Gareth Bale was someone who came into his prime shortly after Ronaldo, and he was able to score similar numbers in his early years at Spurs. However, it's probably not until we've seen Kylian Mbappe and Mohamed Salah where people have somewhat replicated Ronaldo's numbers, but I've never seen a winger as prolific as Cristiano Ronaldo. I mean, of course, he's one of the best players to ever touch a ball. But let me know what you think of players that you think have evolved different positions. I could do more videos on them, very happy to, and there are so many more throughout the course of football history that have changed different positions. Leave a like, comment like I said in the video, and subscribe, that'd be great. But thanks for watching.